The people living in Israel were not doing what God told them to do. They had started to worship fake gods, which went against God's rule that they were to worship only Him. For breaking this rule, God punished the people of Israel by allowing the Midianites to take over their land and rule over them. For 7 years, Israel suffered under their rule, as the Midianites, the Amalekites, and people from the east stole Israel's animals and food, leaving nothing for the people of Israel. The people complained to God, so He sent someone who could explain that everything that was happening to them was punishment for their sin and rule breaking. During that time, there was a young man named Gideon. One day, while preparing wheat in a building used to make wine so he could hide the food from the Midianites, an angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, "The Lord is with you, O brave man of honor." Gideon was not feeling very brave or happy, so he replied, "If the Lord is with us, then why do we suffer so much?" The Lord then looked at Gideon and said, "Go and free Israel from the Midianites." Gideon couldn't believe what he had heard. How could he, a young man from a small, weak family, be able to free Israel from the Midianites? The Lord told Gideon that He would be with him. God was going to give him the strength to fight the Midianites, and He would give him victory. Gideon still couldn't believe he could do it. If this was true, he needed to make sure that God was going to keep His promise. He then proceeded to ask the angel of the Lord for a sign. "If you will protect me and help me, then give me a sign, and I will believe you," Gideon said. Gideon then rushed to his house to prepare a food offering to God. When Gideon returned to the tree where the angel of the Lord was waiting, he brought with him meat, soup, and bread. The angel told him to put the meat and bread on a rock and pour the soup over them. The angel then touched the food with his walking stick. Immediately, fire sprung up and burned away the entire food offering. At that moment, the angel of the Lord disappeared from Gideon's sight. God had just given Gideon a mighty sign. Gideon was completely amazed. That night, God continued to work in Gideon's heart, preparing him for the big task ahead. He told Gideon to destroy the false gods in his father's house. These false gods were what got Israel in trouble. Israel was still foolish enough to believe that a wooden statue could help them, instead of trusting the one true God. As God had commanded, Gideon destroyed the false gods, and in their place, Gideon built a place to worship God, and he made another offering. Gideon was still unsure about leading an army to face the Midianites, so he asked God for another sign. This time, he was going to lay a piece of wool fleece outside overnight. If there was dew on the fleece and none on the dry ground, he would be sure that God was with him. The next morning, Gideon found that the fleece was wet, but the ground around it and everywhere else was dry. God had heard Gideon and gave him a sign. But poor Gideon was still scared, so he asked for the opposite to happen to the fleece. This time, he asked God to make the ground wet, but keep the fleece dry. The next morning, Gideon found that the ground was wet and the fleece was dry. This time, Gideon knew that God was really going to use him to save Israel from the Midianites. The next morning, Gideon and thousands of men gathered together, waiting on instructions from the Lord. God told Gideon that too many soldiers had come. If they won, they would surely take credit for themselves and not give it to God. God told Gideon to let all the men who were scared to go home. After Gideon made this offer, 22,000 of the 33,000 warriors walked away. There were only 10,000 left, but God said that was still too many. Gideon continued to trust God, and he took the warriors who were still there to a stream of water, as God had told him. God told Gideon to send home any of the men who bent down to drink from the stream like dogs. Those who scooped up the water in their hands could stay. Out of the 10,000 remaining, only 300 men were left. On God's orders, Gideon sent thousands of warriors home, leaving Gideon with an army of 300 men. God really wanted to show Gideon that victory comes from the mighty power of God and not by the strength of men. That night, Gideon and his little army looked down at the huge Midianite camp. Gideon trusted God, but the Midianites were so many. God told Gideon to go down to their camp and spy on them. While spying on the Midianite camp, Gideon overheard two soldiers talking. One soldier told the other about a dream he had, and the other told him that it meant that Gideon and the Israelites would defeat the Midianites. Once again, the Lord had strengthened Gideon's heart, and he was finally ready for battle. With his tiny army, Gideon made his plan of attack. He divided the army into 3 groups and gave every warrior 1 trumpet, 1 torch, and a jar to hide the torch. In the dark of night, they would surround the Midianite army's camp. When Gideon blew his trumpet, it would be a sign for everyone else to blow theirs. Then they would break their jars and yell, "For the Lord and for Gideon!" They carried out the plan exactly. When Gideon gave the signal, the 300 men blew on their trumpets and broke their clay jars. The sound of breaking pottery echoed off the mountains, filling the valley with the noise. The Midianites were awake, confused, and scared. They looked up at the flickering torches all around them and heard the crashing sound of the breaking jars, the blasts of the trumpets, and the shouts of the men. They did not know what to do. Confused, the Midianites grabbed their weapons and started running and fighting. The Lord confused the Midianites so much that they started fighting themselves, thinking they were fighting Gideon's men. The confusion spread so fast that the Midianites ran away. Gideon and his army of 300 men ran after them, and it was not long before they defeated the mighty Midianites. That day, God gave Gideon victory over the Midianites. God's mighty power once again proved that He was the one true God, and He wanted to bless and protect His people. All Israel had to do was to put their trust in God and serve Him alone.